Today is May 24th, 2026, Memorial Day weekend. And somewhere in a tunnel complex outside Isfahan, Iran, sitting in sealed metal cylinders, is 400 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% purity. 400 kilograms is roughly the weight of a grand piano. And right now, that grand piano is the only thing standing between a signed peace agreement and the United States military knocking on Iran's door again with B-2 Spirit stealth bombers carrying 30,000 pounds bunker busting bombs that were specifically designed to say hello to underground facilities like the one where those cylinders are sitting. The deal between the United States and Iran is described by people following it closely as 90% done. 90%. That last 10% is a grand piano of uranium. Trump said it plainly from the Oval Office this week. He said, "We do not need it. We do not want it. We will probably destroy it after we get it. But we are not going to let them have it." And Marco Rubio, speaking from New Delhi on Saturday, gave a statement whose final sentence was not a boilerplate diplomatic formulation. He said, "The problem will be solved one way or the other." That sentence means exactly what it sounds like. Iran hands over the uranium as part of the deal, or the military option that has been sitting ready since the ceasefire began on April 8th gets activated one way or the other. And this morning, Trump posted an image on Truth Social showing an American MQ-9 Reaper drone lighting up an Iranian fast attack boat swarm with a simple caption. The image is the message. The MQ-9 is the message. The 48 hours ahead of us are the most consequential of the entire conflict because the grand piano either leaves Tehran voluntarily or something considerably less pleasant. Then a moving crew comes to pick it up. But let's back all the way up, because to understand why 400 kilograms of uranium at 60% purity is the hinge point of the entire Iran conflict, you need to understand what it actually is, what it means, and why both sides of this deal are currently giving completely contradictory statements about what Iran has agreed to do with it. Here is the simple explanation of why this specific uranium matters so much. Uranium used for nuclear power plants is enriched to about 3 to 5%. The material in Iran's tunnels is enriched to 60%. Weapons-grade uranium for nuclear bombs is 90%. The gap between 60% and 90% is smaller than the gap between natural uranium and 60%. In other words, Iran has already done most of the hard work. Going from 60% to 90% is described by Israeli officials as a simple technical step. And at 400 kilograms of 60% material, there's enough to produce 11 nuclear weapons if processed to 90% purity. 11. That is not a theoretical future threat. That is material that exists right now in sealed cylinders underground in Iran, with no international inspectors allowed to verify its location or quantity because Iran kicked out every IAEA inspector on the morning of February 28th when Operation Epic Fury began. The International Atomic Energy Agency Director General called the situation a profound safeguard emergency. That is the most alarming language the IAEA uses. The inspectors are gone. The uranium is there. Nobody outside Iran has independent confirmation of exactly where the cylinders are right now. And Iran is the country that moved that uranium into the tunnels. The day before Operation Midnight Hammer's bombs fell in June 2025 after satellite imagery caught the trucks loading 18 containers at the South Tunnel entrance. Iran planned for this. The uranium's current location is the product of deliberate pre-strike dispersal. That is why Trump said from the Oval Office that in one way or another the United States is going to get it because leaving it there is not an option the United States considers acceptable. Now let me explain the deal framework that the two sides are working from, because this is the substance underneath all the dramatic messaging, and it matters to understand what is actually being negotiated from what can be assembled from multiple sources. Here is the rough shape of what is on the table. A memorandum of understanding kicks off a 30 to 60-day window for negotiating the harder details. During that window, or when the deal is formalized, several things happen. The United States naval blockade on Iranian ports gets lifted. That blockade has been in place since April 13th and has been costing Iran $500 million every day it remains in effect. Iran's frozen overseas assets get released. These are funds that have been sitting in foreign bank accounts, frozen by sanctions, and by the international financial system's compliance with American pressure. Sanctions on Iran get lifted in phases as Iran meets specific commitments in the deal. The ceasefire that has been in place since April 8 gets formally written into a document rather than existing as an informal arrangement. The United States and Israel formally commit to no more strikes. And Iran gets the right to a civilian nuclear program subject to specific limits and inspection requirements. On the American side of what it receives, here is what the framework apparently calls for: an enrichment moratorium. The United States demands 20 years. Iran offered 5. The likely compromise range based on reporting is 12 to 15 years. The Strait of Hormuz gets fully reopened to commercial shipping without the PGSMA toll that Iran has been claiming. Both blockades, the American one and Iran's residual efforts to impede shipping, get lifted simultaneously, and IAEA inspectors get access essentially anytime they want to verify Iran's nuclear activity. And then there is the sticking point. Iran is required to hand over or destroy the enriched uranium stockpile. That requirement is where the deal sits incomplete right now. That is the grand piano that nobody can agree what to do with. Now, let me give you the two contradictory statements that explain exactly why this deal is 90% done and stuck on the last 10%. American officials told reporters on Saturday that Iran made a general commitment to surrender the uranium in Phase 1 of the deal. A senior Iranian source told Reuters the same morning that Iran has not agreed to hand over the uranium. Read those two statements side by side. Both were issued on the same Saturday. Both describe what is supposedly in the same document. An American official saying Iran committed to uranium handover in Phase 1. An Iranian official saying Iran has not agreed to uranium handover. This is not simply a translation problem or a misunderstanding about specific wording. This is two factions inside the Iranian government giving the international media two completely different descriptions of what Iran agreed to. And this is actually the most informative thing that has happened in the negotiations in weeks, because it tells you exactly what is happening inside Iran right now. The civilian diplomatic faction represented by Iraqi and the foreign ministry has been trying to close the deal. They understand the blockade's economics. They feel the pressure of $500 million per day in losses. They know the storage crisis at Car Island is real. They are trying to get something signed. The IRGC hardliner faction led by or close to the new supreme leader Mohammad Khamenei, who inherited his father's position when Ali Khamenei was killed on February 28, has a fundamentally different view of what the uranium means and what surrendering it would represent institutionally. When the American official says Iran committed to uranium handover and the Iranian official says Iran did not agree to that, what they are really telling you is that the civilian diplomatic faction made a commitment that the IRGC hardliner faction has not authorized. That is the fracture inside Iran that is preventing the last 10% from getting done. And it is the same fracture that has been visible throughout this conflict in the clashes between the IRGC and the regular army in for Iranian cities. In the parliament, speaker reportedly placed under house arrest by the IRGC because he wanted to negotiate. And in the two completely different messages coming from Pesky and the civilian president and from the IRGC's public statements on any given day. Now, let me explain why Iran's supreme leader is not going to give up the uranium until he has a written guarantee in a specific form, and why this is rational rather than irrational behavior from his perspective. The example is Libya. Colonel Muhammad Gaddafi was Libya's leader for decades. He had a weapons of mass destruction program. In 2003, after watching the United States invade Iraq, he made a calculation. He surrendered his WMD program voluntarily. He cooperated with the West. He handed over his nuclear materials and chemical weapons. He normalized relations with the United States and Europe. He removed himself as a threat. And in 2011, when Libyan rebels rose up against him, NATO countries provided air support to the rebels, and Gaddafi was captured and killed. The lesson that every authoritarian leader who was watching drew from that sequence of events was this: surrendering your weapons to the West does not protect you. It leaves you vulnerable. The moment your weapons are gone and you're no longer a threat, you lose your leverage. And without leverage, your survival depends entirely on the goodwill of people who may not wish you well. Muchakame has studied this case. His entire inner circle has studied this case. Every strategic planner in the IRGC has studied this case. The uranium sitting in the Isfahan tunnels is not just a nuclear weapons program. It is insurance. It is the thing that makes military action against the Iranian regime expensive and uncertain. Surrendering it before getting an ironclad written guarantee of the regime's survival is the Gaddafi mistake, and the IRGC is not going to make the Gaddafi mistake. This does not mean the deal is impossible. It means the sequencing matters enormously. Iran wants the written guarantee first. The formal ceasefire, the sanctions relief, the frozen asset releases, the commitment that the airstrikes are done. And then once those things are locked in writing and cannot be reversed without Iran reconstituting its nuclear threat, the uranium discussion can happen. The United States wants the uranium commitment in Phase 1 before the full suite of sanctions relief and asset releases happens because America has watched Iran agree to deals and then quietly continue doing what the deal said it would stop doing. The sequencing disagreement is not an accident. It reflects two governments that genuinely do not trust each other and have decades of evidence supporting their mutual distrust. Now, let me give you what Rubio's 3 non-negotiables actually mean and what the final sentence of his Saturday statement tells you about what happens if the sequencing problem is not solved. From New Delhi, Rubio stated 3 things. America will not accept the deal without stop nuclear weapons development, reopen the Strait of Hormuz without tolls, and hand over the enriched uranium. He then closed with the sentence, "The problem will be solved one way or the other." Let me give you those words in plain English. One way means Iran agrees to the uranium handover as part of the deal framework. The other way means the American military solves the problem kinetically, not diplomatically, not through negotiation by physically going into Iran and taking the uranium or destroying it in place with weapons specifically designed for underground targets. This is not a veiled threat or a diplomatic formulation designed to be deniable. This is the sitting Secretary of State of the United States explicitly saying in a public statement that if the deal does not get done, the military option is ready and will be used. That is what one way or the other means. In the MQ-9 image Trump posted on Truth Social the same morning confirms it. You show your adversary what the alternative looks like specifically and visually. So there is no ambiguity about what one way or the other actually involves. Now, let me build the complete targeting chain that activates if the deal does not get done. Because this is what Iran is looking at when it evaluates whether to make the uranium commitment or not. And understanding it in full makes clear why the alternative to the deal is not simply more of the same pressure. Layer 1 is the MQ-9 Reaper. Here is what the MQ-9 actually does over the Strait of Hormuz. Right now, it flies at 50,000 feet. That is high enough that you cannot hear it from the ground. It can stay airborne for 27 hours continuously without landing. It carries a radar system called the Lynx Synthetic Aperture Radar and a targeting system called the Multispectral Targeting System that can track individual fast attack boats in real time. Through complete darkness, sea spray, electronic interference, and jamming attempts, CENTCOM runs MQ-9S in continuous coverage over the entire 21 nautical mile width of the Strait of Hormuz every hour of every day. When an IRGC fast attack boat formation activates, the MQ-9 has already developed a targeting solution before the boats have left the pier. It knows which boats it will engage. It knows in what sequence. It carries 8 Hellfire missiles per sortie and can engage multiple boats in a single pass. The image Trump posted on Truth Social showing the MQ-9 targeting an Iranian fast attack boat formation is not a hypothetical. It is a description of what happens if an IRGC boat formation moves in the strait when the MQ-9 is overhead. The boats do not escape. They are tracked from the moment they activate engines until the moment the Hellfire arrives. And the MQ-9 is flying right now over the strait. Right now as you read this, watching Layer 2 is what almost nobody is talking about, and what may be the most important new element in the targeting chain. The 82nd Airborne Division with its Project Freedom Artificial Intelligence Command and Control Network. Here is what this actually does. It fuses the MQ-9's intelligence and surveillance and reconnaissance data with manned strike platforms in real time. The MQ-9 finds a target. The AI system classifies it, prioritizes it, and transmits targeting data to the 82nd Airborne Headquarters and simultaneously to F-35 pilots, all in real time. Before the IRGC formation can disperse, before the uranium can be moved again. The 82nd Airborne has been getting very little press coverage in this conflict, but they are quietly one of the most critical elements of the targeting chain. They carry Jibo-53 Stormbreaker munitions, which are small-diameter bombs with multi-mode guidance that can hit moving targets in bad weather. They operate advanced drone systems that have not been publicly released yet. And they team with F-35Cs to create a sensor-to-shooter cycle time that is measured in seconds from target identification to weapons impact. Layer 3 is the F-35, both the F-35C which launches from aircraft carriers and the F-35B which launches from amphibious assault ships with the Marine Expeditionary Unit. The F-35B's ability to operate from amphibious ships means it can get into tight geographic spaces near the strait without requiring a full carrier deck. It provides tactical surprise because nobody on the ground can predict exactly where it launches from on any given mission. Its stealth makes it effectively invisible to the surviving remnants of Iran's air defense network. Its sensors feed into the 82nd Airborne's Command and Control Network, adding another layer of targeting coverage to the integrated picture. And Layer 4, the deepest and most serious layer, is the B-2 Spirit. Flying round-trip missions from Whitehaven Air Force Base in Missouri, the United States, or from the forward deployment at RAF Fairford in Britain. The B-2 carries the Jibo-57 Massive Ordnance Penetrator, 30,000 pounds, the bomb that penetrates 60 meters of reinforced concrete before exploding inside whatever it finds there. The Isfahan Tunnel Complex, the one that received Tomahawk cruise missiles in Operation Midnight Hammer, but did not receive the Jibo-57 bunker busters that went to Fordo and Natanz, is the specific target the B-2 and its Jibo-57s are configured to address. If the uranium does not come out diplomatically, the B-2's Jibo-57 is the next option for making it inaccessible. It does not need to reach the uranium hundreds of meters underground. It collapses the tunnel entrance, the launch corridor, the access passages. The door closes and whatever is inside stays inside, inaccessible, unable to be processed further, unable to be turned into a weapon, unable to be used as leverage. Now, let me give you the China-Taiwan situation in the global roundup because this is happening simultaneously, and it is not a coincidence in timing. Taiwan's Coast Guard is in the second consecutive day of standoff with a Chinese Coast Guard vessel, the CCG 3501, which weighs 5,500 tons inside restricted waters near the Pratas Islands. This is the sixth Chinese incursion into those specific waters. Taiwan's National Security Council has flagged that 100 Chinese military ships are currently inside what is called the First Island Chain, the ring of islands that forms the strategic perimeter around China's coast. 100 ships. The Prada Islands sit approximately 400 kilometers from Taiwan. They are lightly defended and exposed. China is not accidentally probing those islands while America's strategic attention is focused on the Strait of Hormuz. This is the deliberate application of the three-front strategy we have been tracking throughout this conflict. While Washington is consumed with getting Iran's uranium out of the Isfahan tunnels before the ceasefire window expires, Beijing is moving its Coast Guard and naval assets into positions that test Taiwan's outer defensive perimeter. The message China is sending is the same message it has been sending throughout the Iran conflict. We are watching the windows of American distraction, and we know how to use them. The Trump administration is managing the Iran deal negotiation. The Ukraine war developments, including the Arctic attack on Kiev that happened last night. The war powers resolution that House Republicans had to cancel because they were going to lose the vote. And now China probing Taiwan simultaneously, for simultaneous pressure points and for different theaters. This is the multipolar challenge that we have been describing throughout this analysis series. And the Iran uranium deal, if it can be concluded, removes one of those pressure points and frees American strategic attention and military assets to focus more clearly on the others. Now, let me give you the strategic analysis of where the next 48 hours actually lead and what the most likely outcomes are given everything we know. The deal is 90% done. The sticking point is the uranium. Iran is given what American officials call a general commitment to surrender it. Iran's own officials deny making that commitment. The gap between a general commitment and a verified, sequenced, physically supervised uranium transfer is the operational gap that the next 48 hours have to close. Here are the three most likely outcomes. Outcome 1 is the deal gets signed with a specific and verifiable uranium handover mechanism built into Phase 1, meaning before the full suite of sanctions, relief. and asset releases flows to Iran. This is what America is insisting on. If the IRGC hardliners authorize the civilian diplomatic faction to make this commitment in binding written form with verification, the deal gets signed. The blockade ends, the frozen assets flow, the ceasefire is formally written, and Iran retains a civilian nuclear program under inspections while giving up the enriched stockpile that represents the 11 nuclear weapon potential. This is the best outcome for everyone except the IRGC hardliners who see the uranium as their institutional survival guarantee. Outcome 2 is the deal gets signed with ambiguous uranium language that Iran and America interpret differently, with the uranium handover deferred to later phases rather than locked into Phase 1. This is what Iran appears to be pushing for. Get the sanctions relief, get the frozen assets, get the formal ceasefire guarantee, and then negotiate the uranium separately in a later phase with more leverage on both sides. America's concern about this outcome is exactly what has happened with every previous Iran nuclear deal. You give Iran the economic relief, Iran recovers, and the leverage to demand uranium handover decreases as Iran's economic situation improves and its political need for the deal diminishes. This is the Gaddafi problem from the American side. Once you release the economic pressure, you cannot get it back without restarting the conflict. Outcome 3 is the deal does not get signed because the uranium commitment cannot be bridged in the current 48-hour window and the United States military activates the targeting chain. We have just walked through the MQ-9s targeting the fast attack boat remnants in the Strait, the F-35s and 82nd Airborne's AF Fusion executing the remaining coastal and underground targets, and the B-2 with Jibu 57s delivering its message directly to the Isfahan tunnel complex where the uranium-sealed cylinders are located. Now, let me give you the honest assessment of what each of these outcomes actually produces. Outcome 1. The deal with verified uranium handover in Phase 1 produces the best available strategic result from the American perspective. Iran's nuclear enrichment infrastructure survives but loses its existing enriched stockpile and commits to a 12 to 15-year enrichment moratorium under inspections. The blockade ends, the regional economic pressure eases. American military assets can be rebalanced away from the Gulf. China's Taiwan probing loses the window of American distraction it has been exploiting. And Iran gets the economic relief it desperately needs without the unconditional surrender that its institutional pride cannot accept. Is this a complete American victory? No, Iran keeps its enrichment infrastructure. The 12 to 15-year moratorium is not the 20 years America wanted. And Iran will likely do exactly what the analyst Danny Katrinoich predicted. Come to the table with something while doing nefarious things behind the scenes. But it removes the 11 nuclear weapons worth of material from Iranian control and establishes a verification framework that makes Iranian cheating more visible and more quickly detectable. Outcome 2. The ambiguous deal with uranium deferred produces the situation that Netanyahu warned about, and that Citrino called deeply flawed. Iran gets its economic relief without giving up the material that makes its nuclear threat real. The enrichment moratorium, whatever length it is negotiated from a position of Iranian economic strength rather than Iranian economic desperation. And the likelihood of Iran actually surrendering the uranium in later phases decreases as the blockade's pressure eases. Outcome 3. Resumed military operations, destroys or buries the Isfahan facility, but does not guarantee that all 400 kilograms of uranium is reached or rendered inaccessible. It restarts the conflict with all the economic consequences the Gulf states have been desperate to avoid. It gives Iran the rallying narrative that America broke the ceasefire after Iran was close to a deal. And it requires the war powers resolution fight in Washington at a moment when House Republicans had to cancel a vote because they knew they would lose it. Here is the picture that emerges from all of this when you put it together. Honestly, Trump is not bluffing about one way or the other. The MQ-9 image on Truth Social and Rubio's statement from New Delhi are both real signals backed by real military capability that is genuinely positioned and genuinely ready. The uranium is the last card Iran has. The IRGC knows it. Mohabbakam knows it. That is why the civilian diplomatic faction is trying to protect it through deal sequencing while the IRGC hardliner faction is flat out denying any commitment to hand it over. Iran is not a unified actor making coherent decisions. It is two factions with different survival calculations expressing those calculations through contradictory public statements on the same day. The faction that understands the economics says make the deal. The faction that controls the military and the nuclear program says never surrender the uranium without absolute guarantee because that is the Gaddafi mistake. The deal gets done if and only if the IRGC hardliner faction authorizes the civilian faction to make the binding uranium commitment. That authorization has not yet happened, which is why the deal is 90% done on Saturday, May 24, 2026. And the MQ9 images on Truth Social the same morning. Here's the bottom line. 400 kilograms of uranium, the weight of a grand piano, 11 potential nuclear weapons. One tunnel complex outside is a ceasefire that has been holding since April 8, a deal that is 90% done. A supreme leader who inherited his father's defiance and his father's knowledge of the Gaddafi lesson. A Secretary of State who said the problem will be solved one way or the other. An MQ-9 flying continuous overwatch at 50,000 feet over the Strait of Hormuz, already locked onto whatever boat formation the IRGC might send. A B-2 Spirit that can be over Isfahan from Missouri or from Britain carrying the GBU-57 that speaks directly to underground facilities. And 48 hours that will determine whether the grand piano leaves on a moving truck or gets buried permanently under the mountain that it has been sitting inside since the day before. Operation Midnight Hammer's bombs fell in June 2020. Iran says it did not agree to hand it over. America says Iran made a general commitment. The MQ-9 on Truth Social is not making the distinction. It knows where the boats are and the B-2 knows where Isfahan is. One way or the other means exactly what it says.